Hello and welcome to another Office Hours. Capsule. That's right. Capsule, a small segment of my Office Hours live stream that I do on twitch.tv/TheAstroPub, youtube.com/TheAstroPub live on Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Would love you to come join this chat right here, talking about Star Citizen lore, news, and more. You're going to start seeing me do a lot more of these videos going forward, especially talking about theoretical topics and looking at the latest news. In 2025, I'm planning on doing some sort of like rundown of the news that I'll be posting at the end of the week on this channel, because if you have been following us, the Captain's Table podcast, which is the thing I've been doing for quite a long time, here is now going to be moved over to its own dedicated channel. Already, it's already been moved over there, so you can find all of those videos there. But for now, let's take a look at the latest release from Star Citizen at the end of 2024, the Lore Makers Community Questions. Tackle a little bit of lore stuff. If you want to see more of this sort of thing, make sure you subscribe to my other lore-based channel, The Astro Historian. Would love to have you there and look more in depth at these lore. But let's take a look at what CIG's writers have for us here in today. All right. Lore Makers Community Questions from December 24th, 2024. Welcome to Lore Makers Community Questions, a series focused on answering your lore quandaries and conundrums. We've done a deep dive through the lore Ask a Dev section and selected 10 questions to answer about Star Citizen universe. Questions are edited for context and clarity, but you can click on the topic to go directly to the original post and conversation. Please drop any questions you might have about the universe in our Ask a Dev forum. Was the UE Advocacy retconned? Question. The CitizenCon presentation showed a list of guilds for 1.0, but there was no mention about the UE Advocacy. Was it retconned, or was it just not a complete list because of the screen space limitation? Answer. In the past, there had definitely been discussions about whether you could work for the Advocacy, but I'm not sure if it involved making them a guild. Anyway, as the teams recently really started to flesh out the dynamic between guilds and factions that fall under them, there was a decision to avoid letting players work directly with law enforcement entities that control landing zones. You'd still be able to pick up jobs indirectly for the Advocacy via factions under the Mercenary Guild, but as an entity, they would remain objective. Even on the flip side, as an outlaw, they could know you're a criminal due to your affiliation with the council, but if you haven't committed any crimes, they'll leave you alone. Okay, so one of the things that's important to understand about lore when we talk about lore of Star Citizen is that lore is not the basis of Star Citizen. Star Citizen as a game was created first. The concept of Star Citizen and a lot of these gameplay ideas come out first, and the lore has been added to justify the decisions. So the game itself has some basic foundational lore, and everything that's been added to it later is a expansion of that lore based off of what is needed for the gameplay. So if it feels like sometimes Star Citizen has gigantic empty holes in its lore, it's because it does. It's intentional, because they want to let those areas sit until the gameplay teams have made a decision on something. So this is a great example. I don't think they've ever really mentioned you being able to work for the Advocacy, which is the law enforcement branch of the UEE. But the idea is that the UE Advocacy you can't become an advocacy agent, for instance. The most you'll be able to work for is, like, say, the CDF, which is directly under the Advocacy. But that'll also be part of the Mercenary Guild, likely. So, yeah. All right. How does the Terra faction justify the system being so exposed to Vanduul attack? Question. The Vanduul can reach Terra with 3 jumps and pass through undefended systems. From Virgil, they can go to Nyx, from Nyx to Pyro, and from Pyro to strike Terra. How does the faction pushing for Terra become the capital of the UEE justify their system of choice being so exposed to Vanduul attack? It's obvious that having your capital so easily available for the deadly enemy strike, even from smaller raiding parties, would be incredibly unpopular, and an obvious objection from the faction arguing Earth should remain as the UE capital. that's basically begging for a decapitating attack. While yes, it's also possible to reach Sol in 3 jumps from Caliban, an incursion would have to pass through Croshaw, a heavily fortified system, which would take an enormous difference in terms of defensibility and force projection. Before they even answer it, because I already read this, one of the reasons why that's not a good idea is because there's only 2 jumps. Sol only has 2 jump points, one to Croshaw, the other to Davian. So reinforcements would have to go through one of those systems. So if you're being attacked through Croshaw, you can't go through Croshaw to reinforce Sol. You have to go through Davian, which means you have to go around to the other side, go around through Davian to get to Sol, which would slow down things, and you'd have this bottleneck of things. Whereas Terra is a nexus of 8 jump points. So there's many different ways you could approach Terra, avoiding any sort of avenue of invasion. So they don't mention that here, but that is another reason why Terra is often cited as being a better choice than Earth as the capital for the UEE. And if you're interested more in this kind of things, we are going to be doing a lore breakdown, both a live stream on Monday, December 30th, and also a full video discussing the main story of Star Citizen, which specifically talks about Terra. The conflict between Terra and Earth, and the political conflict back and forth of who should be in the future of the UEE. What's the future capital and the future, who's in control of it. Answer: Terra being 3 jumps from Vanduul space would be a lesser concern for those in the pro-Terra camp. For them, the greatest threats to the UEE come from within, like entrenched powers on Earth, stymieing progress for their own self-interest / preservation. This isn't surprising, considering that the pro-Terra movement actually predates humanity's first encounter with the Vanduul in 2681. Prior to that, in 2638, Terran governor Asan Kiernan brought the pro-Terra movement into the mainstream by proposing the system secede from the UEE. Following the fall of the Mezzers, the position evolved into moving the UEE capital to Terra. This policy became the cornerstone of the Transitionalist Party thanks to the influence of Clement Renfield, who believed that the former Mezzer loyalists were more of a pressing threat than the Vanduul. If the concern is raised to a supporter of Terra, they can argue that what you already pointed out, that Sol is also 3 systems away from Vanduul space. And if such an attack comes, wouldn't it be better to fight the Vanduul in an unclaimed system that's lightly populated and developed? Better to fight in Pyro or Nyx, where there is less collateral damage and civilian deaths, than Croshaw, which is also like fighting in New York City or Boston. It is one of the oldest systems in humanity, so it's like fighting in a museum. Not necessarily a good idea. So yeah, basically, for those of you who don't know that the main story of Star Citizen is going to revolve around a political conflict between the Sol system and the Terra system, or Earth and New Terra. New Earth, Nova Terra, which is just simply shortened to Terra, which is a separate system and a separate planet in the Star Citizen universe, because it is a natural Earth-like super Earth. It's Earth but better, is the way that the Terrans would describe it, and it's an analogous of the conflict between Rome and Byzantium, aka Constantinople, of which would become the center of power in the Roman Empire, with Byzantium, aka also in this example Terra, being a economic center, whereas Rome, aka Earth, being the traditional center of power, Western and Eastern Empire sort of thing. So yeah, this is going to be one of those things that'll be brought up a lot as we reach to Star Citizen 1.0, which is the main plot of Star Citizen 1.0. How did the Valar migrate to Monarchs? Question. Valar have been stated to being native to Lear 3. The Lear system was discovered in 2677, yet Valar are on Monarchs and Pyro, which was discovered in 2493. I was wondering just how the Valar got to and adapted to Monarchs, Pyro 2, in Pyro. Presumably, they would have been brought there by someone after 2677, since the chances of coevolution of the exact same creature named the exact same thing on worlds separated by both space and their human discovery timeline, which seem remote and implausible. Answer. Valar are an invasive species on Monarchs. They're much smaller than they were. They are much smaller when they're young, and thus fairly easy to transport from planet to planet. No one knows exactly how they got there. Some blame smuggling trade, some being me, But at some point, enough got loose on monarchs that they established a breeding population, and the rest was history. Valar are prized for their some of their materials you can get from them. We don't know what they do in crafting or in game, but we know that they have valuable materials on them. So my theory is that the Valar, which is the sandworm, right, as you can see here, were brought to monarchs because monarchs is not regulated. It is an unregulated system or planet, but has similar attributes to Lear 3. So they thought, we can bring this to a place where it has no regulations, and we can breed them in captivity and then harvest their resources when they get older. Not realizing that they couldn't do that, and it got wrong. It went way wrong. Think alligators in New York sort of thing. So yeah, it's not that difficult to think of, I don't know, invasive, a very rare species that's invasive to one area being brought by humans to another area to become a major problem in another area. What I just described could define every part of humanity at some point has done that to every part of Earth. You've probably in your own life have an invasive species of plant, bug, or some other type of insect or animal that is probably invasive to your region, which is causing problems to the native fauna and flora of your region. Lore before 2070s. Question. The last Galactopedia update mentioned that humans visited Luna, standard Earth year 1969, which aligns with real life. Duh. Are there other events that at the start of the Star Citizen in Squad 42 as the same as real life, or are the past events that happened differently? Is it safe to assume that there was a Roman Empire? The fall of the USSR? How does this existence of other privatized space companies work in lore? Are they simply renamed, or did their existence get deleted before 2070? Answer. There had been some discussions in the very early days of whether we wanted to establish a divergence in the historical timeline, previous to present day, in order to distance ourselves from seeming like we're making projections of how the future will be. As in, if we had gone to Betamax instead of VHS, would we have jetpacks by now? But ultimately, the decision was made that to stick with the current historical events for ease's sake, splinter out the timeline in the future, and then chronicle our own fictional progress, as we did with time capsules. To your final question, sticking with with that approach and the modern world, I would assume that there is probably a handful of privatized space companies around, but one of that catapulted to humanity's expansion is well established, RSI. I mentioned this in my complete history of Star Citizen lore, part 1, but I mentioned things like Bigelow Aerospace, SpaceX, and other companies which are pretty famous now for being privatized. But it was 2070 when RSI's first major breakthrough happens. So it's pretty clear that by the 2070s, either these private space companies have disappeared, conglomerated, RSI purchased them, something happened to those companies because they no longer exist in lore after 2070s. They don't even exist before the 2070s, but if we assume modern day, it's still pretty distant. Forgotten Kruger Intergalactic? Question. I feel like Kruger is one of the forgotten brands, with their headquarters located in Castra, which was announced and was one of the first 5 systems, which I called. I'm wondering about the future intentions of the brand that they are offering us. Will there be new ships, components, improvement diagrams, weapons? Answer. Kruger Intergalactic, being a lesser-known brand, feels fitting because their primary business is manufacturing custom parts for other companies. They've held lucrative outsourcing contracts with Bering, RSI, and others for centuries. Only recently did Kruger begin to make their own products, and they may remain extremely selective about what products that make it to market, bearing the Kruger name. Currently, players are familiar with their ships, the P-52 Merlin and P-72 Archimedes, and the ship's weapons, Tiger Strike and Quarreler. Yet Kruger, like all other in-game companies, have more products on the market than just haven't made it to the game yet, and exist within the fiction. Regarding what might make it to the game next from Kruger, narrative can't say. The decision primarily falls on the dev team creating the assets, with the intended function and look guiding them to the right manufacturer. That said, we're excited to see what's next for Kruger ourselves. So yeah, Kruger is a parts manufacturer. That's how they were made. They've existed in fiction for a long time. They are actually headquartered originally in Magnus, and because of problems with Magnus slipping into piracy, they had to move to Castra. Fun fact, Clark Defense Systems, which makes a lot of the armor that you wear, especially if you wear like the marine armor stuff, that's all Clark Defense Systems. I think like the Orc armor is made by them even. AEP is definitely made by them. Their headquarters is Castra as well. So, but I'd imagine that a lot of the subcomponents and other components that we have in game, we'll start to see the Kruger label added to them. So, all right. How does IP law work in the universe? Question. With the upcoming ability to acquire blueprints and create our own rip-off or improved versions of popular manufacturers' weapons, ships, and other goods, how does IP law work in the UEE? If I was Crusader and spent 1 billion credits designing the Hercules, I think I would be pretty unhappy to see an unaffiliated group with a base on Hurston had assembled out of low-quality materials and even slapped our logo on it, as though we stand behind their construction quality. Will construction items be established manufacturers require some sort of license fee? Does Crusader have the ability to declare you a counterfeiter and put a bounty on your head? Or does the UEE not have any formal laws protecting such things? And it's more, if you can successfully steal the plans, if that's a them problem. They should have secured their facility data better. This was an interesting one because this is a question that comes up a lot. They actually fully answer it in a way that it does mesh with what they already have established with lore, which I'll go over here in a moment. Excuse me. The commerce laws of the UEE have evolved in the 30th century to be relatively open and have severely limited copyright enforcement. Part of this is that fabrication technology got more advanced. Companies were dealing with a flood of knockoff products that were watering down their own brand recognition, which is specifically the problem that was brought up in lore with the Pyro multi-tool. When the Pyro multi-tool was first introduced, it was super easy to manufacture. So a bunch of people made a bunch of knockoffs, and it forced Grey Cat to go into litigation for like 100 years, trying to chase down all of the knockoff manufacturers and shut them down, which became a problem. While illegal, it was extremely difficult to police. In an effort to combat this, it became more common for large manufacturers to offer official blueprints to help ensure the products met their own base specifications. In this way, fabricated products are no longer seen as counterfeit, but as equivalent with the versions made by the manufacturer. Though it should be understood that fabrication is not completely free for all. These blueprints have heavy data protection on them to prevent widespread sharing. This means for the most people, they require blueprints by purchasing them, though some are fortunate enough to receive them as a gift, or even luckier, find an unbound copy. Additionally, some blueprints may have limited use or have been locked production capabilities, limiting how frequently they can be used. Overall, though, most of the general population, i.e. 90% of the people who are not players, are content to purchase items rather than attempting to print them for themselves. Sure, you can make a wham burger at home, but rather than having to source all the ingredients, it's much easier to head down to the local chain and just buy it. This is even more so for the case with items as complex as a ship. Obtaining all the resources is quite involved. Worth it for anyone who really wants to find control over the final product, but most civilians in the verse, buying direct from the manufacturer is the obvious choice. So, effectively, you need to have a huge amount of using an economic term, the cost to enter the market is massive, and the risk to enter the market is also massive because you're competing against the actual product. So people are going to go to an authorized dealership to buy a ship rather than you, and they're taking a major risk of buying it from you. So it's like, do you want to go buy the name brand product or the knockoff product on Temu? You're buying on Temu, you're going to take some risks, but you can still do that for a lot of products. So this allows for gameplay, obviously, but there's also some things in here we can pull out for gameplay. For instance, we didn't this is implying that there may be limited use blueprints. Like some blueprints may only be able to be used every so often. Like you can only produce one ship every week or every day or every other day. So there may be some limited limitations to your blueprints in game as well, based off this lore. This is another way of looking at lore, is because lore is a lot easier to write than it is to It's a lot easier to write than it is to produce the gameplay for it. Often the lore is written in conjunction with the planning of the actual gameplay and is able to be released before the gameplay. So it seems as if the lore is creating the gameplay, when in reality they're both created at the same time. It's just one person writing a story doesn't take nearly as long as building, crafting as a gameplay loop. So, basically they solve the problem by giving official blueprints, which makes it easier for people to produce things, and allows them to have a standardized partnership sort of thing. Argo ATLS acronym meaning. Question: the names of Argo vessels and models correspond with acronyms. MOL, multi-operator laser extractor; MPUV, multi-purpose utility vehicle; RAFT, reinforced advanced freight transport. So what does ATLS mean? Answer: ATLS equals assisted transport and loading system. Nice. Figuring out these Argo acronyms are always fun to exercise. Credit for this one goes to John Crew. Good job, John. Question: from the descriptions, Nyx 1 seems to be a very similar planet to Monarch's Pyro 2. Both are coreless planets that were heavily mined shortly after their respective systems' discoveries and subsequently abandoned, which led to many of the former mining bases being taken over by outlaw gangs. But in what ways does Nyx 1 plan to be different from Monarch's, apart from having more greenish color of rock, as shown in the concept art images from CitizenCon 2954's outline of the road to 1.0? Answer: there's definitely going to be more info coming that players can expect with Nyx as development continues on the system. Even though both Pyro and Nyx are independent systems beyond UEE's borders, the hope is that each will have its own unique feel, with Pyro showcasing life under outlaw rule and Nyx a more brutal life on the frontier. While we don't want to go into specifics beyond that right now, I do want to confirm that there will be incoming adjustments made to the existing available lore, like galactic guides. This will be the case for all future systems too, as they're in active development. Much of the lore as it exists now was crafted before gameplay had a chance to be refined. As Richard Tyler described in Stars My Destination presentations at CitizenCon, many of the planets in our system have been described as desolate and depleted to align with development expectations at the time. However, our ability to populate worlds has progressed significantly since then. While we will still have barren worlds to trek across, many of the planets will become richer and more memorable experiences for players to explore. A good example of this is the evolution of planets in Pyro. Now, if you follow my lore content on the Astro Story, I actually did a video specifically on this, where I described what the change was and how landing zones, like landing on planets, was never planned in Star Citizen. It was planned as a post-release feature. And once it became a major feature, obviously they had to make the landing zones, the planets, meaningful. They had to make fun gameplay to happen on those planets. That doesn't mean that every planet is going to be bursting with life. They're still going to have barren planets, as they said. But it's important that I always like to say is the theming. And Pyro was always sort of this hot planet with its main gimmick, its main gameplay idea was that it had these flare stars that would burst out and take you down. Nyx, it's in the name. Nyx is the goddess of night. So it's at the edge of this dark nebula, which is said to mess with sensors. So it's very difficult to get data from, to use modern sensor technology and scanners to be able to find things that are that far away from you, which is the reason why Nyx itself was used as sort of a refuge for political dissidents from the Messer era, because it was hard to get detection in there. So even if you wanted to find where they were, it would be much more difficult to find them. So they were just mostly ignored. But I do expect that theme of sort of political dissidents on the harsh edge of the frontier to continue to be there. But I do not expect them for the planets to be exactly as they are now. I doubt we're going to see it not be a dark nebula, though. All right, we're almost done here. We got two more. The presence of Imperator Addison. For those of you who don't know, Lani Addison is the current Imperator of the UEE, meaning she is the head of the UEE, the elected dictator of the UEE. Question: will we get an updated model of her? Since the character creators greatly improved since the campaign photos, I was wondering if the UEE would be addressed sometime in the future by her with the updated model using her improved FOIP system. Answer: definitely. We're actually discussing plans earlier this month to give Addison more of a presence in the fiction, as her administration has been a little quiet as of late. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Addison has had a bunch of things earlier around her election in 2950, but we haven't seen much of her since then. Little things here and there, but not much. Where did the name for the Ponos boots come from? While playing with a friend, we quite by chance found a boots named Ponos, which translates in Russian as diarrhea. So I wanted to know if the appearance of the boots is the same name was originally planned, or is this some sort of joke by a Russian-speaking developer? Answer: to provide a peek behind the curtain, we get the names. The names when items get a narrative pass, 2 or 3 potential names are pitched. I'm going to make a joke about how CIG can't name anything. Whoever makes those choices, Chris, needs to learn better. Then narrative leads review and pick their favorite based on what sounds or feels right for the brand. Okay, so it's not Chris. It's narrative leads. Narrative, please get better at naming things. In case of the Ponos boots, the name was pitched was because the ancient Greek for toil, labor, hardship. So Ponos, I think Ponos. It's like my Latin and Greek is rusty at best. Felt like a fitting name considering their rugged work boots meant to withstand whatever labors you put them through. The Russian meaning is not intended, but very funny. Hey, it works. All right. So that is the lore makers questions. Specifically, what it's called. It's called the Lore Makers Community Questions. I'll be covering all of these sort of announcements every week. So if you enjoy this sort of content, to kind of go through and get a detailed analysis of everything that CIG releases, I do this. You can join us live at twitch.tv/TheAstroPub, youtube.com/TheAstroPub live to join chat here in our discussions about these sorts of news, lore, and more from the Star Citizen universe. Love to have you come here. If you did enjoy this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button to be notified, or hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell icon to be notified when it is released. And as always, let me know in your comments below what you think about any of these things. And check us out on youtube.com/TheAstroHistorian for more in-depth analysis of any of these topics. Thank you for watching, and like I say every time, hope to see you someday in the black.